Hi, so I'm Daniel Moore. I'm Senior Product Designer for Authentication and Authorization. And I want to talk a bit about the RBAC design pod and the current status of the RBAC work that we're doing in the pod and the auth group. So first off, what's a design pod? So a few of us were getting user-related feedback about overlapping problems, specifically in regards to our permissions and the roles that we have. The the five roles that we have are limited to currently guest, reporter, developer, maintainer, and owner. And so we wanted to try and collaborate to address the problem and maybe investigate a product-wide solution instead of just being it kind of compartmentalized to one particular group and having disparate solutions across the organization, which kind of has led up to the problem that we're experiencing today, where every component within the environment has some unique or particular feature permission structure that only applies to that feature or aspect of GitLab. What is RBAC? So RBAC is role-based access control. GitLab has the RBAC permission system with our 5 roles, as I mentioned previously. And for large organizations who require more granularity and control, compliance regulations, these 5 roles don't necessarily fit that or fit in their requirements. So I'll give you an example here. If we look at the permissions, we have quite a few here. And just as an example, for a developer can view product audit events. Well, perhaps that's not a compliant thing that is allowed for all members in an organization. Perhaps there's a compliance restriction that says only group owners or particular auditor persona can view audit events. And there's other things, like things that are more complicated or more security focused, such as like the repo, can rewrite or remove Git tags, things like that. So a number of the features that we offer within these various 5 roles offer too much flexibility or too much freedom. And that makes sense for like a smaller organization. But once you start increasing the number of people in your organization, especially having to deal with compliance or security aspects, that can be a bit of a problem. As I mentioned here, the current 5 roles are too permissive. Organizations have to make compromises in the permissions, causing compliance problems. And we have a number of interviews you can go if you wanted to see some more detail of that. One of the specific examples I'll cite here is that the user stated, we assigned a user a reporter role, but technically speaking, that user could go and change the issue boards. That's what we found. So you think the reporter is only able just to do the reporting of select for views, but technically they are able to edit the issue board. And that's causing kind of a downstream effects or negative impact. We did not intend for that role or for that user to be able to modify the issue box. It's more of a Scrum Master role or a program manager task. So a lot of this is basically come down to organizations have very specific roles that just simply do not match the 5 that we have. And so with the group that we are working on with Amelia and Andy and myself, we've begun trying to aggregate some of this information or some of this problems that we're getting from feedback from users. So Amelia had spent a bunch of time going through this whole table and categorizing the concepts that we see here. So for example, like issues are now compartmentalized into one particular section in her work that she's done for this, and then license compliance. So going through this whole table and just trying to group things into a more of a logical system instead of just a table of data. And the reason for that is kind of what we were getting feedback from our users, is that our users have a lot of experience with various platforms with various permission models. So they are not necessarily afraid of going in and making these granular changes or customized roles. So the knowledge, the level of expertise is quite high for this sort of complexity. And the adoption should be pretty simple if we were to try and expand or iterate towards this direction. So let's take a look at the prototype that we have created so far. Let's see here. Of course, it opens in a new window. Moment. So let's see. So the idea is that we'll be at our dashboard view here. We'll go to our admin settings, and we'll have this new section labeled roles and permissions. This has not necessarily been defined yet. Again, this is just a rough wireframe. We're trying to get feedback from users and just to get a kind of perspective on how they feel about this. And this is the categorization that Amelia had invested in trying to group these topics. So the idea is that we might have our default roles here, which would be used as kind of like a way for troubleshooting or kind of like a safety check to make sure that an organization can revert back to a permission without having to break something or reevaluate or recreate these roles. So these will be unmodifiable, kind of like a zero state, so to speak. And then we would have some way to separate that content so an organization would have their own permissions. So the idea is we would go ahead and create a new role, give it a new name, for example, incident manager. We would have a role to base it off of. So based off of our current 5 roles that we have, we can use that as a template. So the idea is that whenever you make a selection off of the template of the 5 personas or the 5 roles, that would then change the content within the table. So in this example, a developer does not have access or ability to delete epics. So if I were to say, well, I want that permission, I'll go ahead and turn that on. And then we'll go ahead and create this. I'll now have my new incident manager role, and I'll be able to then apply that in my environment. So let's go back to the dashboard, and we'll go back to the members. I'll invite a member, and I'll give them my new role of incident manager. And this is kind of the step where we're at right now to see getting feedback on, does this sort of setup make sense? What sort of problems we might encounter in the flow so far. We've already got a number of interviews completed, thankfully, and we've gotten a lot of feedback already. So our next step is to take that feedback we've gotten from the users, make some improvements on the prototype, and then do a second round of user testing based off those improvements. The largest concern right now is specifically we need back-end resources to reevaluate the scope of the problem because currently our devs have told us that our permissions are not just confined to one space. In terms of making changes in one location will impact the entire platform. They're kind of all over the place. So there might be an effort to try and refactor the permissions table across the organization to kind of clean them up and make it more usable in a state for where we can actually implement this new customizable RBAC UI that we're trying to envision here. So right now, like I said, it's kind of in a research phase, and hopefully this will come out, or at least we'll have some better progress in the next quarter or two. But that's not until we're kind of restricted until the backend can kind of evaluate the problem and get us some feedback. From our side, I think a lot of it's going pretty well. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that we've been able to collaborate with the 3 of us together and get this moving forward. It's been a big problem that a lot of users have been asking for years, sadly, and it's just because of the scope of the problem has always been pushed back. So hopefully, again, like I said, this will be moving forward now that we have more resources being thrown at the problem. So that's my presentation.
Thanks, Daniel. Good job catching up on time too.
Yeah.
So, does anyone have questions for Daniel? We have a tiny bit of time. Okay, I don't see anybody typing. So if you want to add a question later, feel free to add it. And I'm going to stop recording.